guys, it's Tech Support here, and today we will be doing a Kali Linux tutorial specifically for the M2 Apple Silicon chip. Now, in our previous videos, we discussed a little bit about the different types of hackers and the different types of attack vectors that might be, but today we're actually going to start getting into it. So, as you guys might be wondering, why am I using a Mac? Because, as some of you guys might know, Windows or general Linux operating systems are a lot more popular with the ethical hacking community. However, a new study has shown that 71% of college-age students prefer Mac computers over anything else. So I wanted this tutorial to be accessible to most people out there who want to maybe learn ethical hacking. Also, there aren't a lot of resources available for the Apple operating systems, specifically for the M1 and M2 chips. So today we are going to learn how to be running Kali Linux in a virtual sandbox using the Apple Silicon architecture. Now, another question that you guys might be wondering is, why Kali Linux? Because we have different operating systems like Parrot OS out there that some people might consider more lightweight or better to use. However, Kali Linux has historically been known as kind of the Swiss Army knife of penetration testing operating systems, and it's personally what I started with. I find that the documentation online, there's a lot of it, and it's quite beginner friendly, especially because there's that many resources. So today we will be using Kali. Now, for our actual virtual environment, we will be using UTM. Now, what UTM is essentially just a virtual machine, specifically for Mac computers. It is based off of QEMU, which is like an open source virtualization software, and it works perfectly with the Apple Silicon. Now, in my experience, I have tried things like VirtualBox and VMware. However, they simply just do not agree with the M1, M2 architecture, specifically when it comes to Linux operating systems. So today we will be using UTM, especially because Kali Linux has a nifty little version specifically for the Apple architecture. So what we are going to want to do, first things first, is download UTM. Now, I already have it. This is not a complicated download process, so we're just going to want to follow the instructions on the screen. Now, the second thing that we're going to want to download is, of course, Kali Linux. So in order to do that, we're going to go to the download button over here, and we're going to choose installer images. Now, I'm not going to get into what all these other things do, but basically they just provide different settings, but we want to use the ISO file, so we're going to click on installer images. Now, as you can see over here, there's different options. We have 64-bit, 32-bit, and Apple Silicon, which is what we want to use. So we're going to click the download button on this installer right here. Now, I'm warning you guys, this download does take a little bit of time. I have already downloaded this, so while this is downloading, you guys can listen to a little bit of an explanation about what these two things do. So now, the 64-bit architecture is essentially just not in an ARM format. It's using just the normal 62-bit. So this is actually possible. We can use it under a different setting in UTM. However, it will cause performance issues, so we're not going to want to necessarily use this over that. 32-bit is quite deprecated at this point. However, you guys can try it and let me know in the comments below what exactly happened if you tried to use 32-bit. So what we're going to do is, once this is all downloaded, we're going to want to have this Kali Linux distro in a place that we can find. And we're going to want to open up the UTM. So now what we're going to want to do is create a new virtual machine. So now this is the option that I was talking about before. So technically, if you use the 64, you could click emulate and then use that image over here. But because it is going to create, less beneficial performance, we're going to use virtualize. And as you can see over here, it says only run the native CPU architecture, which luckily for us, this is in. So we're going to click on Linux because it is Kali Linux after all. And we're going to ignore these two options over here. And for the ISO image, we're going to browse. And we're going to click on the ISO image that we just downloaded. All right, now for our memory, we can decide exactly, how many CPU cores we're going to give it, exactly how much memory we're going to give it. I'm personally just leaving this as default. As long as you make sure that this works on your system, that this is not overloading your system, this should be okay. Now, this is the same thing with storage. You need to ensure that you have enough storage on your computer to be able to do this. So, for example, if you have this set to 64 gigabytes, you need to make sure that you have at least 64 gigabytes of storage left on your computer. Now, the absolute minimum that we can run this in is at 32 to be safe. Currently, I don't have that much storage on my computer. I mean, I have enough, but I don't want to waste that much of my storage, so I'm going to set this to 32. Now, just be aware that you need to remember that whatever you set this to is going to dictate exactly how much stuff can be downloaded onto your Kali Linux machine in the future. So, for example, let's say I put 32 gigabytes and I want to download a bunch of fancy packages that put me over, and let's say that's 40 gigabytes of downloads. That would not be possible, and that would cause errors in the machine. So whatever you set this to, you need to ensure that that's not going to become an issue for you in the future. So if you know that you want to use this Kali machine for, a lot of different large packages, then you're going to want to increase this number quite a bit. All right, so this allows us to have a shared directory into the virtual machine. So for example, if you would like this Kali Linux machine to be able to access the files in your home directory, for example, you can set this up. However, with some of the stuff that we're going to be working with, this might actually pose a little bit of a security hazard, so we're going to leave this unchecked. All right, so now we can name this whatever we want. I'm going to personally name this Kali Linux. And we're going to click Save. Now, this is very important. I had some issues with this in the past of, getting black screens and stuff like that. Before we actually want to do the installation process, we're going to need to click on this button over here for settings and then create a new serial. Now, this is because the graphical install currently is not working, and so the only option we have is a terminal install. So what this does really is essentially create a terminal for us to use to be able to install and boot the machine, and then when we're done with the boot process, we're actually going to delete this. But for now, we're going to have this created with under New, Serial, and make sure it's there, and click Save. All right, so now we're going to run this virtual machine. Now, as you can see, two windows will be popping up. This is the general Kali Linux, and this is the Kali Linux terminal. And this terminal over here is the one that we want to be using. So we're going to click Install. Now, as you guys might know, under graphical install, you're able to use the mouse and things like that, but under regular install, you are not. So in order to move around this UI, we're going to be using our arrow keys and the return button. So in order to click Install, I'm going to click Return. Now, these messages are normal, by the way. This does not mean that there's any issues. Okay, so now we're going to select our language. For me, that's going to be English. I'm in the United States. I'm going to be using the American English key map. Now, as you guys might see, certain parts of this process will take longer than others. There's actually going to be a point where it's going to take quite a while. But if you think about it, the whole computer needs to be downloaded onto here, so it makes sense that some of these install times will be a little bit long. All right, so at this point, we're going to enter the host name for the system. We can leave this as default. Now we're going to create the domain name for our system. Once again, we can actually leave this blank as we're not going to be using this at the moment. All right, so as some of you guys might know, Kali used to be a little bit different. You could kind of just run everything as root and not necessarily have to be creating all these users. However, Kali Linux has changed its operations a little bit due to security reasons. So in this case, we're actually going to have to create a user account, and later we can, access sudo commands and things like that in a little bit of a different way than, let's say, we did, 5 years ago. So currently, I'm going to enter the full name for the new user, which in my case would be tech support. All right, so I'm going to create a username. Make sure that you guys remember your username and password. If you do not, you will be locked out of your machine, which is no good. So ensure that this is something that you remember. Now, when it comes to your password, as we might have talked about in the last few videos, password security is important. So we want to choose a password that's, not easily on a word list, and we also want to choose a password that's long enough and complicated enough that it can't just simply be brute forced. So I'm going to choose a good password with a mixture of capital letters, lowercase letters, special characters, and numbers. But again, just make sure it's something you remember, otherwise it's going to cause problems later down the line. All right, so now we're going to configure our time zone. Now, this is actually deceivingly important. So if you do not click the right option for your time zone, even though I believe you can change this later on, it can cause issues with certain website certificates, and it can actually cause an issue where you're unable to download certain packages. So make sure that you select the right time zone for you. In my case, that is Eastern time. All right, so in our case, we're going to be using the entire disk. Now, as you can see over here, the virtual disk is over here because that's the disk that we're using. In this case, it says virtual block device, which is apparently the device that UTM sets up for us. All right, so in our case, we're going to be using all files in one partition. As you can see, this is recommended for new users. At the moment, we don't really have a reason to be separating our partitions, so we're going to click the first one and click return. All right, so now we're going to finish partitioning and write our changes to disk. Now, I remember when I first started this process, I was always a little bit concerned that this would somehow access my host machine. That is actually impossible. So when any sort of changes to disks are created on any sort of virtual machine, it only affects that virtual machine itself, and it is impossible for it to actually affect your host. So let's click return. And in order to write the changes to disks, we're going to use the arrow key to select the yes button and then click return again. So now it is installing our base system. All right, so at this point, we're going to do software selection. In this case, we're actually going to leave everything default. Now, this is the type of environment that you want. Make sure that XFCE, which is Kali's default desktop environment, is selected. Now, if you click any of these other ones, Kali Linux will look very different and not necessarily in the best of ways. Now, down here, this is a little bit less important. This is just the default tools that it's going to come with. As some of you guys might know, we're going to be installing a bunch of tools later, so this part is actually not as important. So we're just going to leave everything default and click continue using our return button. Now, this part of the process, I'd say, takes the longest. It has taken quite a few minutes for me, so if you guys want, get up, get some water, get a snack, because this is going to take a while. Just make sure that your computer does not go to sleep, because that will cause issues in the installation process. I'll see you guys when this has loaded in. So we are back. As you can see, it is cleaning up at 97%. So now we shall be put on to the next phase of this. Wonderful. So as we can see over here, installation is complete. So it is time to boot into your new system. As you can see, it says over here, make sure to remove the installation system. So we can click continue over here. But we're actually, once this installation has finished, we're actually going to close out of this. Okay, because it's actually going to show us this again, which we do not want. So we're going to close this out. We're going to confirm to kill the VM. Go to the settings again and make sure that we remove this serial. And then click save. Here and change the CD, DVD, and we're going to click clear because we need to remove our installation media. All right. So now we're going to click play again. Okay. So now at this point, we should be seeing these options, and let's click return for the first one, or just simply wait because after 10 seconds, it automatically shows you your login screen. Now, this is where your old username and password comes into play. So make sure that you created one that you remember. In my case, it's tech support, and then I have my password. Now, as you can see over here, unlike the non-graphical installation, it will kind of harvest your mouse, so you are able to use your mouse here. All right, now you have officially booted into Kali. Now that we've officially booted into Kali Linux, we still need to do a few more things before the setup is over. So we're gonna go to the terminal over here by hovering over the terminal emulator, and we're going to type in sudo apt update. Now the only thing this does is make sure that you have the newest updates of all the possible packages. Now this sudo keyword over here is especially important because it gives you root access. So when you click return, you will actually be prompted for your password because you are having root access to this machine. So this password is going to be the exact same password that you set up your machine with. All right. So basically now what we're going to do is we're going to ensure that everything is upgraded. Make sure you have the sudo. All right. Now, as you can see, it's going to warn us over here saying that 31.9 megabytes of disk space will be used. Do I want to continue? Yes, we do. Now, once again, this is going to take a little bit of time as it upgrades all of the possible packages that you have. So we will be back once this is fully downloaded. All right, so as we can see, these packages have finished upgrading, and now we have a beautifully working Kali machine. So now you guys can go and explore all the wonderful tools that Kali Linux has to offer. And there's going to be more explanations about all the different tools and some fun things you can do with that in some future videos. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.